Communication Theory, Communication 1302. I assume that if you're watching this lecture, you have found your way now to WebCT, where hopefully these are video streamed and that's how you're seeing them. This is a required course in the School of Communication. There will be 200 to 300 students a semester who are enrolled through distance education, on cable, various means, who are taking this course. We will try during the course of the semester to stick pretty closely to the outline that is in this book, which is one of your required books. You'll want to look at your syllabus to get ISBN numbers, that sort of thing. You've probably already found your syllabus, and that's how you knew to log on to WebCT and locate this first lecture. We will be going through the course in the order in the table of contents, although we may be referencing other materials as we go along. We will be using slides along the way as we look at different processes. These PowerPoint slides are also loaded on the WebCT website, so you don't need to try to stop your computer along the way and copy down the information on the slide. On the syllabus, there are cues to the particular PowerPoints that are correlated with each of the lectures. The names may not make much sense to you. It may just say MHAUN 1 or 2B or Cyberdot PPT. Don't worry about that part. Just match them up and proceed accordingly and find them. Those codings make sense to me, and that's the important thing, so that I get the right PowerPoint with the right lecture. Now, the first thing we're going to do is take a look at a definition of communication. You've probably seen or heard the question about if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it and so forth. Well, let's look at our first slide, and we'll borrow Horton the elephant and let him help us out. But if Horton knocks down a tree in Sherwood Forest, but you didn't hear it, was there communication? And if you said, yes, there was, why did you say that? If you said, no, there wasn't communication, why did you say that? If I deliver a brilliant lecture over this videotape and nobody listens to it, or if nobody can remember it after they listen to it, did communication take place? Why or why not? Well, a lot of that answer depends on our definition of communication. There are a number of elements that make up communication, and we're going to be looking at those. The simplest definition of communication that I know is one that Marshall McLuhan wrote years ago, and we'll see it again when we get to the last unit this semester, the mass communication unit. But McLuhan said that communication is simply information transportation. Well, that's very broad. That'll take care of honeybees and dolphins and people and plants. They actually set up a galvanometer, there you go, skin testing machine to some plants years ago, and hooked one plant up to the other plant and burned one with a cigarette, and according to the researchers, the other plant flinched, or well, maybe not flinched, but responded and registered on this machine. Now, was that communication? How valid was all of that? We don't really have to figure that out and decide, and perhaps you don't even care. But the question is, the idea is, if there is an exchange of information between one computer and another, between plants, dogs, people, dolphins, is this communication? And McLuhan would say, yes, that anytime this information transportation occurs, some type of communication has taken place. Now, we're interested in this course primarily in human communication. We may refer to our pets and our cats and dogs and flying squirrels and so on later on, but we're mostly interested in people. So we're going to focus in on a process or a definition of the process that is more specific, that involves a source, a receiver, a channel, a message, feedback, noise. So let's take a look at each of those items more specifically and be sure that we're all on the same page, and we'll also look at the context. Be sure that we're on the same page about what those terms mean. Before we do that, let's make a little distinction here between linear, interactive, and transactional communication. Linear is very much like what you're getting with this lecture. You as the viewer cannot respond to me specifically this time. You can send me an email, but that's a delayed type of feedback, and we'll talk about feedback in just a few minutes. But linear is one way. A State of the Union address by the President, a special news conference that deals with a terrorist event or an immigration policy. It's one way, like shooting an arrow and toward an apple tree and hitting something. And maybe you hit the audience, maybe you don't. In transactional or in interactive, let's do interactive next. In interactive communication, it's kind of like a ping pong ball going back and forth. Ping, pong, back and forth, back and forth. Can you think of some examples of communication that you engage in that are interactive? One thing that comes immediately to mind for me is my Christmas cards. I always send out holiday cards in December. Some of them don't make it in the mail until January, my New Year cards. There are people that I only communicate with once a year, former college roommates, etc., people in towns where I used to live. And we only exchange those cards one time a year, usually with some kind of note or letter attached to them. And so there's that interactive notion. A card goes one way, a message goes the other way. Now in transactional communication, we're looking at a process that's ongoing. There's exchange taking place all of the time, as long as the two parties are engaged with one another. It's irreversible and it's an ongoing process. One person is decoding while the other person is encoding. And both are really encoding and decoding at the same time. Okay, so we could pick a definition for our purposes that, we said McLuhan identified information transportation, but the process by which senders and receivers exchange messages in a given context. Excuse me. Okay, we're going to look at some examples of these, but I'm going to back up for just a minute and get that list of terms that we had. Here we go. Context, there we go. Okay, the source of the message is the person who is doing the encoding. And maybe when you were younger as a receiver, you had a secret decoder ring, or maybe you had that paper that you rubbed some magic fluid like lemon juice on it and the ink suddenly appeared. And when that happened, you were decoding the message. Okay, the source does the encoding, the creating of the message. The receiver does the decoding or the breaking down of the message. And all of this takes place in some kind of a channel. Now you might ask, how many channels are there? And the first thing that might come to mind would be their telephones, their cell phones, there's text messaging. Basically, the 5 channels that we have are our senses. We either hear a message, we see a message, smell a message, taste a message. And are some of you thinking, now wait a minute, how do you taste a message? Well, think about your favorite restaurant. Think about your favorite kind of pizza. Whatever your favorite drinks may be. Your choice of a restaurant is very largely influenced, besides price, by the quality of the taste, how well you like the flavor of what's being served. We pick environments, we sometimes pick people based on the kind of perfume that they wear or aftershave or whatever. These are all sensory influences, channels that are coming through our nose, our olfactory system. So the channel may be visual, it may be audio, it may only be heard, it may only be seen. You know, you've got all kinds of combinations of these, and at least your 5 senses. I guess even you could, if you've got extra sensory perception, well then you've got 6. I don't, so don't count on it, okay? Our messages will either be verbal or nonverbal. Verbal or nonverbal. Very simply, this means the message either has words or it doesn't have words. Nonverbal simply means without words. And we're going to come to some examples of different combinations in a minute. Feedback is the response of the receiver to the sender. The response of the receiver to the sender. It's really just another message because one person is speaking to another. But we use that designation of the receiver, or we use the designation of feedback to indicate that message is in response to a prior message. Okay, noise. Noise is a concept that refers to any interruption in the communication process. The noise may be internal, it may be external. Can you think of some internal noise? How about psychological noise like daydreaming? If your mind wanders off during a lecture, if my mind wanders off during this lecture, we're going to have a little problem. There will be some disruption in the process. The tape will probably keep rolling, but I'll have to think about where I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to be talking about. There are external factors that constitute noise. Those are more obvious. Crashes, bangs, things that go bump in the night. These are external elements that if they're too loud or if they're too distracting, they interrupt the process. But the internal noise may be psychological, it may be semantic, if there are words that we don't understand. If one person says to another, "You look resplendent today," or to the 4-year-old you say, "That flower is exquisite," and the person doesn't know what the word means, then we've got some semantic noise there. There's a misunderstanding over the meaning of that particular word, and that's going to be disruptive to the process. That sometimes happens in this course when we get to terms like cognitive dissonance or linguistic relativity. People sometimes say, you know, "What are you talking about? I've never heard those words before." We'll discover as we go along that a great part of what we're about in this class is a naming process. We are naming elements of human communication. We are using theories to explain how people communicate with one another, and we are learning the names of those theories, and we're learning the concepts that are representative and specific to those particular theories. Now, sometimes students will say, "Why don't we just have one big theory of communication? Why do we have to learn so many different theories?" Well, that's because different theories explain different things. And the more labels we have for the more communication events in our lives that occur, the better we're able to understand those and relate to them and use them to at least explain and sometimes even predict what's likely to take place. Okay, let's move along. Got us caught back up here to where we were a minute ago. Okay, see if you can give an example of the following things. A spoken verbal message. Well, sure, Han, that's easy. That lecture that you're engaging in is a spoken verbal message. But do we have such a thing as a spoken nonverbal message? A spoken nonverbal message. Do we ever speak without words? Well, sometimes we do. When we yawn, that sends me a message if half my class is yawning. If you're yawning out there right now, see, I don't know it, and that's a good thing. Okay. When we go, or sigh, or make other little noises vocally that don't actually have words attached to them, but yawning, sighing, crying, groaning, all of those are examples of spoken nonverbal messages. Excuse me. A written verbal message. What's an example of a written verbal message? Well, if you're reading the slide that's up right now, you're looking at a written nonverbal message. Do we have written nonverbal messages? Written nonverbal messages. Well, those occur when we have something like a stop sign, a happy face, an unhappy face, any kind of sign or logo that we can identify with, and it gives us some sort of a message. And it's written down on paper. I can even look at the back cover of my book and know by the colors that that's the book that goes with this particular class. Okay, we're going to turn our attention now to the nature of theory itself. And let's look at a definition of theory and talk about what makes theories useful or not so useful. A theory is a body of statements that represent a clear, rounded, and systematic view of a subject. Think about that for just a minute. And think if you can think of any theories. And I'll be asking you to think about those theories more in just a minute. Theories represent a human viewpoint at a high level of abstraction. And you probably can identify with theories in the hard sciences more easily than you can with social sciences. Okay, useful theories have a wide domain, and the parts of the theory fit together with consistency and logical relationships. They fall under three perspectives: laws, systems, and rules. In the laws perspective, the basic principle or format is all A's are B's under conditions 1, 2, 3. In systems theory, the premise is A affects B, B affects C, C affects D, D affects E, and so on. And the rules perspective says that a person does B in order to bring about C. Now, in the hard sciences, for example, you have things like the law of gravity, or you have Newton's laws. These are broad general perspectives that say all things are a particular way under certain conditions. The systems theory looks at that interactive nature, and rules we'll see later on. People particularly use rules. Okay, we have different kinds of data that we use when we're exploring theories, when we're testing hypotheses. and you'll get more of this in your research methodology class. Your data may be nominal, which is a simple list. It may be rank ordered, or it may be statistically weighted. In nominal data, well, for example, if I told you, make a list of your personality characteristics for me. List 10 personality characteristics, or maybe it could include roles too, doesn't matter. List 10 keywords that describe you. That would be a nominal list. Then if I said, go back and put those in rank order, tell me which is the most important, which is the least important. Then I would have more information than I had the first time. If we were able to statistically measure these, then we would have weighted data. Okay, when you have statistically weighted data, you have the most valuable kind of data, because this is a situation where you have actually constructed your variables, you have tested your materials according to an accepted methodology. You'll learn more about those particular techniques when you get into the research methodology course, or if you've already had it, you know what I'm talking about. But for example, if I ask you to list your personality characteristics, then you would simply have, if I said, give me 10 words that describe you, that would simply be 10 words that describe you. But if I ask you to then go back and place those in some kind of order, number them from 1 to 10, the things that most represent you, I would have more information than I would have if I simply had the list, because I would have a rank ordering. I would know which things were the most important. If I were able to use assessment tools that have been tested, that we know are valid and reliable, then hopefully I would, if I'd constructed everything well, I would have interval data or statistically weighted data, and that in turn would give me percentages, so that I might know that 25% of the time you view yourself as very happy, that 15% of the time you're depressed, 10% of the time you're studious, whatever words, or maybe you've done it by roles, that you're a student, a worker, a son or daughter, a parent, and you could go back and assign percentages to those. Anyway, we don't want to bog down with that, but it's simply to say that data is important and so forth. Okay, before I raise the question, why don't we have one big theory of communication? Some authors have even tried that, and you may have been wondering what these, not that these are one theory of communication, but I've brought a number of books along to show you that there are a lot. This is just a sampling of some of the more recent books. This is Introduction to Communication Theory, Analysis and Application. This is by West and Turner. That's what, and if you wanted supplemental books to read, but you're certainly not expected to, you know, these are possibilities. Communication Theories in Action by Julia Wood. Building Communication Theory by Infante, Ranker, and Womack, a nice thick one. Almost the Bible of communication theory is the Stephen Littlejohn book on theories of human communication. That one may be a little sophisticated for our purposes, but there are lots of books out there, and Littlejohn is one particularly who in his last chapter tried to put it all together in one big eclectic theory, and there's just so much to deal with that it's difficult to put it all together. It's kind of like saying, why don't we just look at the universe, look at instead of having all those constellations up there in the heavens when you look at the planets and the stars. Why don't we just give one big name and one sense we have, you know, when we say the universe or solar system is pretty broad. But that doesn't tell you very much because you need more specific honing in on things in order to identify and relate and be specific about the contents. So this is what we're going to see as we move into our communication theories, that we will look at them across context. There are theories that deal with groups, theories that deal with organizations, theories that deal with mass media, theories of interpersonal communication. We'll spend a lot of time on interpersonal theories because there are a lot of theories there, and because that's a very interesting level for us to study. Most people enjoy that focal part. But that's Unit 2, the material for Exam 2 covers interpersonal material. In this particular segment of the course, we're doing the broad overview, and we're looking later on at the intrapersonal level, our own thought processes, how our brain works, how we process information in the decoding and encoding process. But as we do this, we want to maintain a scientific attitude, even though we recognize that that's going to be a little bit different from the hard sciences, that we want an inquiry that's, the definition of scientific attitude is that it's poised for the implementation of scientific method. And in scientific method, there's a statement of the problem or a tentative hypothesis, observation, classification, generalization. And just as different theories in the hard sciences, like the physical sciences, give us explanations for things, similarly, that occurs in the social sciences. It's just harder for us to predict because we're dealing with people. But let's look at some of these characteristics. Whoops, got away from me there. Okay, in the realm of things that we're trying to explain, the more theories we have, the better we're able to zoom in or focus on a particular area of interest. And so if you could kind of use the analogy of a microscope or a telescope. If you're looking at one part of the solar system, you know, you can aim your telescope towards Saturn or toward the Milky Way, or probably shouldn't aim it toward the sun. You could aim it to the moon, you know, and you would see something different depending on what focal perspective you take. Or if you're looking at slides under a microscope, if you're a pathologist and, you know, you're looking at all these little samples that you have under the microscope, every time you change the slide, you see something different. Well, that's pretty much analogous to what happens with communication theories. Every time we change the theory, we change our perspective, and that changes what we're able to see. So what are some things that theories can do for us? Well, if we look at the slide, we'll see the basic functions of theories. Organize, focus or summarize, observe or clarify, explain, predict, generate research, facilitate communication, enable control. Let's think about each of those things for a minute. It helps organize the information, whether we're looking at mass media or if we're looking at interpersonal relationships, intimacy between couples, discipline in families, Well, let me read you a thesis topic that one of our current graduates is working on, and this one's a mouthful, so I have to read it. Assessing the role of communication competence and social support between cancer patients transitioning to survivor roles and their oncologist. Assessing the role of communication competence and social support between cancer patients transitioning to survivor roles and their oncologist. Well, later on, we will look at critical incident theory, which is a spinoff from narrative theory, and we'll see how that particular theory facilitates this particular investigation, and we'll look at the research hypotheses that were involved in this. But the theory helps you organize the information about a particular area. It helps you focus and summarize the material. It will help you observe and clarify. It often explains things. The best theory is able to predict. You know, the law of gravity will predict how something not in a vacuum will fall. 32 feet per second, and whatever that translates into in kilometers and so on. It helps generate research. Well, let me go back to explain for just a minute. Attribution theory is one of those theories, and don't worry about it today. This is just an example. But attribution theory says that people attribute causes for behavior, that we will systematically assign causes for something until we get to the most plausible cause for that. So if someone's supposed to meet you for an appointment, meet you for dinner, and they don't show up, then automatically you assign causes for that. Are they stuck in traffic? Did they have a flat tire? Did they decide they don't like me anymore and so they're trying to annoy me? Whatever it is, and the most plausible cause is the one that you will go with, and you'll systematically discount other causes of behavior. Okay? That explains what people do. If somebody spills a drink, gets chocolate syrup or spills wine or something on a chair at your house, are you going to kill them on the spot, or are you going to forgive them, or something in between? Well, it will depend on how you attribute the cause of that behavior. Do you think it was really an accident, or do you think they were being irresponsible? Had you warned them before and they ignored the warning, etc., etc.? The point of all of this is not the consequence. Today, the point of this is that the theory explains what people do, and that helps you understand why people worry about certain things, why people respond the way that they do about certain things. But in that particular theory, there's not much predictive power. Although with some people, you might be able to say, well, this is a very forgiving person, and so I predict that out of all the possible causes, this person will assign a cause that enables them to forgive you. They'll say it was just an accident. Okay, theories also help us in terms of generating research. For example, we'll see later on Kenneth Burke's dramatistic pentad, and that's a little 5-part methodological tool, if you will, of act, actor, agent, agency, scene, and purpose. I think I named 5, but anyway, when we get there, we'll look at those. But those generate research because it works well. If you're analyzing the presidential campaign of 1960 or 1968 or the Compromise of 1850 or a particular movement, you can look at the act, you can look at the actors, you can look at the scene or context, You can look at the purpose, and you can look at the agency, the means that were used. Were these speeches on television? Was this Harry Truman riding on the back of trains? If you've studied history, then you may have seen the particular newspapers that said Dewey defeats Truman. And of course that wasn't true. Truman won the election. So you go back and you used Kenneth Burke's dramatistic pentad as a methodological tool to give you those 5 parts of the pentad. Works very well for master's theses. You write an introduction, do a chapter on each 5 segments, and do a conclusion, and you got if you've done your research well and have good sources and so forth, you've got a good format for developing that research area. Okay, good theories also facilitate communication. Communication professors, at least, sit around and talk about these things. Okay, when I was at the University of Illinois, we would sit in a particular coffee shop, and as graduate students, we would listen to the full professors debate inductive and deductive reasoning, and talk about Aristotle and which came first, inductive or deductive, and so forth. About the only person I have to carry on conversations like that with is Dr. Robin Williamson, who will be doing some lectures for us later on in this course. But, Dr. Williamson and I will sit there and talk about Marianne Fitzpatrick's marital typologies and how typical independents and separates and traditionals are and so forth. But I have to admit, most people really don't get excited about this. But, there's always hope out there that we will recruit some more people to our camp. Critical incident theory we'll see later on. And that's one that Dr. Query and I, our very own Dr. Query here, and I enjoy talking about because it has all kinds of implications for research that's going on in the health communication context right now. But I won't get too far off on that. Okay, finally, the function of a theory is that it enables control. The more we understand about something, then the more we're able to control the situation, to be aware of what's taking place. You can probably tell by now when people are, quote, kissing up to you, when they're buttering you up and they want something. Certainly parents get good at this. I raised 3 daughters, and when they were teenagers, 3 girls in 4 years, so we had lots of teens around the house. But anytime one of them came into the kitchen with an opening, or anywhere in the house, with an opening line like, "Oh, Mom, you're the most wonderful mom in the whole wide world. You are so terrific." Yeah, really. What do you want? Okay. Well, I now understand, after all these years of communication theory, that what is being used is a compliance gaining strategy. And we'll see those in the interpersonal unit. But whether people are making promises, engaging in bribes, using threats, appealing to your self-esteem and your self-image, which was what was taking place there. Oh, you're so wonderful, and a wonderful mother would give me the keys to the car, or would give me an extra amount of money to go shopping. Yeah, right, well, I'm not that mom. But sometimes I was. Okay, but you can see through those things. You'll enjoy the interpersonal unit because there are strategies like cost escalation, where you up the ante on the relationship, or attributional conflict is a good one, where you pick a fight and blame it on the other person. Anyway, those are just previews of things to come. But the more you understand those things, then the better you're able to evaluate them and identify them. So the question becomes, what kind of theories, or which theory is the most useful, which ones work the best, and so on. And we're going to look at some characteristics then for evaluating the theories. First of all, The theory needs to be clear. If you can't understand it, how much good is it going to do you? And not all theories will have all of these characteristics that you see on the slide, but the more of these criteria that a theory can meet, the better that will be for you. Okay, is the theory simple? Not is it, do you need a negative IQ score to understand it, but is it simple enough to be understandable? The example of attribution theory that I gave you was a simple theory, so that made a good little example. Here, some of the theories are more complicated and can't be identified in a paragraph. Social exchange theory, for example, says we exchange goods, or we exchange items, we exchange time for favors, we may exchange money for gifts, we may exchange friendship for assistance. There are different things that people exchange with one another. But not all things are appropriate for exchange. So anyway, is the theory simple? Back to our slide. Is it clear? Is it simple? Is it coherent? Does it make sense the way the theorist has put it together? I've seen some models, and a model is just a visual representation. It may be physical or it may be a picture model. But I've seen some models that had so many factors in them that you couldn't keep track of them, and you couldn't remember it when you turned away. So is the theory coherent? Does it make sense? You certainly wouldn't want a theory that contradicted itself. Is the theory original? Or is this just a rephrasing of someone else's theory and maybe a new label tucked in, or maybe it's the same old concepts of source and encoder and decoder and feedback and all of that, but all they've done is put it into a different arrangement, a different design. Okay, knowledge integration. Does this theory fit in with other theories? Or if you buy this theory, then do you have to throw out some other theory? For example, well, let's go through these and then we'll talk about another example. Is it comprehensive? Is it widely applicable? If it only describes people in downtown Houston and is not applicable to people in major cities across America or around the world, that's not very widely applicable. Is it testable? Is it verifiable? Can you go out and test the Big Bang Theory? It sounds like a pretty good theory and so forth, but you know anybody who's started a solar system lately? I don't think so. Now, there may be things going on in the universe that we're able to, the birth of stars or whatever. There may be, and I'm sure there are some things out there that are verifiable, but there are other things that are not. Can the theory predict? Is it flexible? Is it open to change? Okay, let's take an example. How many of you know, for example, that we have one planet in the solar system that's spinning backwards? And if you're repeating this course, do you remember what the answer to that is? Okay, which planet spins backwards? Okay, that planet is Venus. Venus is spinning what's called retrograde. It's going the wrong way. So if the Big Bang Theory is true, why is Venus spinning backwards? Well, probably it means that Venus was formed at a different time from the other planets. Okay? If it was formed at a different time, how did it get there? Well, then you get into all kinds of explanations. There's a really cool older scientist who passed away a few years ago named Immanuel Velikovsky. I think that's a really cool name. And he believed, and he had lots of ethnographic research to support this. He actually published 3 books, but establishment science didn't buy it too well. But he believed that Venus broke off of Jupiter, that a comet or an asteroid or, you know, some big projectile out there in the universe smacked into Jupiter and knocked off a big chunk of the planet, which is why it has a spot on it. And that when that massive material went sailing through the universe, it eventually coagulated and got itself in orbit number 3, I think that's right. Anyway, you know, got into Venus's orbit, and that's why Venus is spinning backwards. I don't know whether that's true or not. I can't test it. I don't know anybody who can test it. We don't want to go out there knocking chunks off of Jupiter to see what happens to them. Okay, but it's clear, it's simple, it's coherent, it's original. It pretty well fits in, as far as I know, with other knowledge and so forth. It's as comprehensive as it needs to be. You can see how it's meeting those tests of a useful theory. Now, I'll probably slip up a few times in the course of the semester and refer to a theory as being good. Really, theories are neither good nor bad. The better term is useful. A theory is either useful to you or it is not. And so we pick our theories about people based on the degree of usefulness that they have. And if we're interested in semantics, or if we're interested in why people tell stories and how the way that they tell those stories makes a difference in their lives, then we're going to pick narrative theory. We're going to pick a different type of theory than we would pick if we're interested in how the cultures of organizations emerge, or how the leadership patterns in an organization affect the productivity, satisfaction, and efficiency within that organization. Okay, we're going to look next, I'll have to get some new slides up here in just a minute. We're going to look at systems theory, and we're going to look at information theory, which is a specific form of systems theory. We're going to start with systems theory because, as far as I know, this is the most widely applicable theory that we have available. It has application across a variety of contexts, from bugs and little things to organizations to human systems and so forth. So I'm going to switch over here and pull up a new set of slides. On system theory. And one of my former students helped put this together, so I think you're going to enjoy the little things that we have here. Okay, let's take a look at this first slide, which says, by now some of you may not yet understand systems theory, even after Dr. Hans explained it. Well, I haven't actually explained it yet, but I will. But Mr. Wink is here. Throughout his presentation, he will introduce systems theory to you in such a way that hopefully by the end of the presentation, you'll have a better understanding of it. And we're going to look at some of those characteristics. First of all, a system is a set of parts or objects that are structured and interrelated. They form a unique whole in an environment. They're set apart by a boundary, and usually the system is open rather than closed. And you'll see this in your book too, but the distinction between an open system and a closed system is that the open system has exchange with the environment. So, for example, the university, how do you know the University of Houston, where it stops and starts in comparison to the University of Texas or Texas A&M, Tech, etc., etc.? Well, there's a set of parts. They're interrelated. They make up a whole. They're in an environment. They're set apart by a boundary. Now, with distance education, the boundaries are getting more ambiguous. That's still based on copyrights and logos and what channels things play over and so forth. We know where our parameters are and where those boundaries are. And the open system is one that has exchange with the environment. In the case of a university, what would you guess is the exchange with the environment? Think about that for a minute. It's easy to think, if we're taking potatoes and turning them into Lay's potato chips or whatever your favorite brand might be, there's input, there's transformation, there's output. So whether it's potatoes becoming potato chips or peanuts becoming peanut butter, that's a relatively easy kind of transformation to see. Okay, in the case of a university, well, theoretically at least, we're taking naive, only slightly educated students and processing you for at least 4 years, on average 6 years, and we're putting you back into the environment, and the environment then says, ooh, you trained this person well, you're doing a great job on this camera, or, oh my gosh, the first day on the job, here are all the catastrophic things that happened, we don't want any more of your graduates. That would never happen around here, but we put people out in the marketplace and we get good feedback or not. Let's look at some more of these things. Okay, so whether it's cells, plants, animals, humans, the open system has exchange with the environment. A closed system, by contrast, and there really aren't very many of them, but we need the contrast for definition. A closed system is one that has no exchange with the environment. A clock or a watch is a good example, particularly these battery-operated watches that are a battery-operated clock. Now, true, at some point somebody has to change the battery. And at that particular moment, there is an exchange with the environment. But otherwise, the clock just sits there ticking on, or however it's running, doing its thing and has no exchange with the environment. The universe, by definition, has no exchange with an outside environment. Why? Because the universe represents the ultimate in boundaries as we understand it, and there's nothing beyond the universe for it to engage in any kind of an exchange. Okay. Definitions. Okay, Mr. Wink is going to introduce you to an open system which will be a family. In this case, the Johnson family. And so the Johnsons, along with Mr. Wink, are going to go through systems theory and look at the characteristics. Now, these are boringly defined for you in simple terms in your textbook. Here are the players: Stephen the father, Nicole the mom, Susie going to college, Nat who's a rebel, and Sniffles the family dog. And here are the characteristics, and these are the characteristics of every system: wholeness, equilibrium, interdependence, which probably shouldn't have a hyphen in it, equifinality, hierarchy, change and adaptability, exchange with the environment, which we've already talked about. And these are the characteristics of any open system. So is your body, for example, a system? And the answer is yes. As humans, each of us is a whole, even if you've had a few body parts that have been removed through surgery or something, or you just lost your wits and you're functioning anyway. Each of us is a whole, and we function that way. And we'll see as we go through these characteristics that whether it's people or cars or organizations, whatever level we're on, the set of parts that make up the whole, set apart by the boundary in the environment. They all have to have equilibrium or balance. Those words mean the same thing. Interdependence, and remember when we looked at types of theories, laws, rules, systems theory, laws, systems, rules, that interdependence meant that A affects B, B affects C, C affects D, E, F, G, however many parts there may be to that. Equifinality is the goal-seeking behavior of the system. Some of you change your majors 4 or 5 times before you ever got a college degree. And being able to change and adapt is important. Toffler, in his paperback book that sold so well, Future Shock, said that the people, i.e. the systems, the organizations that are able to change and adapt will be the ones that survive in the long run. Hierarchy just points out that as people, we develop a pecking order. Somebody has to be president or CEO or top dog and so forth, and we rank order ourselves accordingly after that. Okay, let's look at them one more time, a little more briefly this time. But wholeness says the whole is greater than the sum of the individual parts. So if the Winks are having a family meeting, it's more valuable if the whole family comes to the meeting and takes part in the meeting than it would be for only the dog and the father to take part. The members of the family must work together to solve problems. It takes all of the members in a family to be a family and function as one. Now, you could have somebody out at work, or, somebody could be in and out now and then, but basically you need all. It's kind of like if you break your arm and it's in a sling for a while, you've still got your arm, it's just not working as well as it might. And so whatever the parts are, they all need to be there and come together. Okay, here's family. Where is everyone? It's family discussion night. I know you all don't have family discussion nights, but bear with me. Okay, and no one's here. We all need to be here to talk about where we want to go for a vacation. And so they've got a little problem. They're trying to locate everyone. Okay, here comes the second characteristic, this rippling effect that we've already talked about. If the dog suddenly decides to hide Stephen and Nicole's car keys, then problems arise. If there are no car keys, Stephen cannot go to work. Nicole cannot drop off the kids to school. If Susie misses school, then she'll miss basketball practice, and Nat will be late for a test. If Stephen doesn't go to work, he may lose his job, while Nicole may never be able to go attend to her business activities. If the parents lose their jobs, there'll be no money and no food for the dog. And, then the dog will be upset. The effects go on. And this is it's like throwing a stone into a pond of water and watching the rippling effect go out from that. The characteristic applies whether it's a unit as small as the family or if it's a unit like Methodist Hospital or any major hospital. If Central Supply doesn't order the supplies on time, if they don't have the necessary supplies for surgery, then surgery goes on hold. Surgeries either get canceled or delayed. If surgeries don't take place on the normal schedule, what happens? Well, you don't have patients moving into ICU, or you don't have patients moving from surgery into the rooms. You don't have people who move into the rooms. What happens? The rooms aren't used, therefore there's no billing for those rooms. If the rooms are not billed, the revenues go down. The revenues go down, there's a budget problem. People may not get paid. People may get laid off as a result of that. All because Central Supply didn't order sutures. Okay. and you can imagine, just even think about the university context. If housekeeping didn't clean up around here, we kind of take them for granted, and most of them work on the late night shift. But, you know, it wouldn't take too long before the trash began to pile up. So anyway, the second characteristic is this rippling effect that we have. Okay, and here's our visual image of the dog hiding the keys and creating ultimate chaos. And this is interdependence. It's characteristic of cars, people, organizations, you know, across a variety of levels. Okay, the third characteristic is this idea of balance. How do you adapt? How do you change in order to get things back in balance or homeostasis? The family could spend money from their savings, from their bank account, to pay for a trip to Disneyland or wherever they decide to go. But if they do that, they ought to at least try to earn the money back again that they spent so that they can balance their account again. Now, some students I know just keep running their charge cards up, but you're not supposed to do it that way. Okay, you have to give up, they may have to give up some other luxuries to make up for the money that they've lost. So they have to learn to adjust, save some money, balance the bank account, otherwise they'll be in some kind of serious financial problem. Okay, the fourth characteristic is the goal-seeking behavior. And for some of you as students, this may mean changing your major 2, 3, 4 times. Stephen, Nicole, and Susie may try to get Nat to study harder so that he'll do better at school. They may try bribing, pleading, begging, but they'll keep working to see that this goal is accomplished. When we had the evacuation for the hurricane, many of you, I'm sure, left town and tried to find routes out of town, and if your goal was to get to Austin or Dallas or wherever, you probably changed your route a few times when you discovered how crowded freeways were, or if one gas station was out of gasoline, you changed and went to a different one, and you kept trying alternatives until you found a behavior that hopefully help you achieve your goal. Some folks, though, did not achieve their goals. They ran out of gasoline along the side of the road and so on. Okay, here's poor Nat. Well, I hate studying. And so there's begging and bribery and pleading, and even the dog promises to be good. Okay, hierarchy, as we mentioned before, refers to the lines of power and control in superior-subordinate relationships. And in any type of system, there's always some type of power structure. In some families, the father is considered to be the superior one. In some families, there's a more matriarchal approach. The mom is the top of the chain. And they've got an example here. And by Cateche's creativity, mom is the boss in this family. Okay, and here we go. And probably should say mom is queen rather than king, but anyway, the idea is that she's the dispenser of the money and that people have to negotiate with her. Okay, the sixth characteristic is change or adaptability, and this is when the systems adjust in order to survive, and it's influenced by feedback. Susie goes off to college, things will change. There'll still be a family, but there will be one less person in the house. So they have to adjust to a new lifestyle. They have to get used to Susie being gone for longer periods of time. During the hurricane events, the reverse was happening. A lot of people had friends and relatives moving in with them. And so the change in the adaptability meant putting more people in the house, cooking for more people, sleeping more people, making those adjustments. You know, every time you add someone to a family, you have to adjust the bathroom schedules and so on. Okay, so here they go. And they're changing and adapting and cheering Susie on. Okay, the final characteristic is the exchange with the environment, and we've been talking about that one already. You know, Sniffles was even taken in as a puppy and transformed into it. Of course, nature kind of transformed him into a dog, but whether he grew up as a dog with good manners or not so good manners, whether he grew up as a friendly pet or a guard dog to bite all strangers, you know, all of those were kinds of adjustments and characteristics of the exchange. So here's our family again. Stephen and Nicole took their young children and their puppy Sniffles and turned them into hopefully grown-up responsible citizens, and Sniffles grew up to be a fine dog. Okay, so that's our little example of the Johnson family. We're going to turn more specifically now. Let me see if we can get into, let's look at information theory next. Okay, some of the key terms that go with information theory are information, of course, entropy, peace, bit, turbulence, information load, and uncertainty reduction. And we are likely to see information exchanges in any kind of system that we're dealing with. But we're getting a little more specific this time. This particular theory actually had its roots with the work of Shannon and Weaver, back in the 1950s. I think 1948, actually, now that I think about it, is when they published their first book. They were working for the telephone company, of all things, in, I believe, the state of Illinois. And they were interested in how much information could be transmitted in a signal that goes down the telephone line. Now, I've never really understood how the information goes down the telephone line. I just know that it does, and I'm grateful for that. But if you've got a source and a destination, and you're moving that information along, and this was one of the earliest models of communication theory that we had. The source, the encoding of the information, the movement through that line, through some kind of a transmitter to the destination where it was decoded and reached its final point. Well, in any situation like that, there's the information being transmitted, there is entropy, the amount of chaos or uncertainty in the situation, there are pieces of information, and then there's what's called a bit, and this is just an arbitrary definition, but it reduces by half the number of alternatives, and we'll come back to that idea in a bit. Is that the unintended pun there? The turbulence is the amount of entropy, uncertainty in the situation, and there's an information load that we have to deal with as well. How much can the channel handle, and how can we reduce that particular uncertainty? So we're running a little short on time for this lecture, and so we're going to pause here very shortly, but we will pick up in the next lecture with an application of information theory. We'll also look at cybernetics and move on to some other things. A reminder that all of the PowerPoints are on WebCT, and you can go back and review them there. Have fun.